I woke up feeling really fatigued. I get on the bike and my heart rate, as you can see from the data, at a zone 2 level in the warm-up, and this is the benefit of obviously having zone 2 power and heart rate combined.
Yeah.
Looking at history, you can kind of get a gauge where you typically sit. So typically for 200 watts warm-up, I'm at about 125 beats. I think it was about 135 to 140 beats.
Yeah.
So a lot higher. What should I have done?
Probably taking it easy.
Okay.
Yeah. So you want to, this is the juggling act, right? You want to look at power, heart rate, and your RPE. So how hard do I feel like I'm going? RPE is really important, and a lot of people think RPE is king because without RPE, we have nothing.
Yep.
You can tell me how much power you're doing or how much heart rate, but I have no idea how hard that was for you. So
but sometimes really you come. The thing that I don't like about RPE is sometimes you come good. So you might do the first one and it feels like a 10 out of 10. And then for the same wattage, the next rep feels like an 8 out of 10. Then the next one feels like a 6. And that's where we're going to go with this, because that's where I was hopeful, but it didn't actually end up being
and that's the balance between all three.
True. So, that's a good point.
That's the balance. So if your power's the same, heart rate and RPE is the same, then cool, you're doing the right thing.
Okay.
But if your RPE is through the roof, power's not hitting where you want to be, then probably need to just chill, have a recovery.
Yeah.
Especially for a high intensity session, because it's so fatiguing. Yeah, for this session, it's hindsight looking back at it, and you know now too that it causes a run-on effect. So it's not just the one session; it's the 4 sessions after that you impact.
Well, and more. So then you look at the session itself, and you look at the VO2 max intervals. When you just look at the raw data, what don't you like when you see that?
Decreasing power across the efforts. So the first effort was okay. You're doing 400 watts. Essentially, it was not quite average 400 watts, but you're hitting 400 watts occasionally, around 390. Which for you, 390 watts is like middle zone 5. VO2 power. You started out 114%, which is pretty good. If you had to maintain that throughout the session, that's a reasonable session. But you ended at 106%. So you're in threshold. You're not RPE wise and exertion wise, you probably are at your maximum effort.
Felt like zone 5.
Yeah.
Felt like zone 5.
Yeah. And that's the RPE balance, power balance.
Okay.
I'm going maximum, but my power is nowhere near what I should be able to do. So in that situation, what do I do? Like, that was too much for what your body could have handled that day. And that's a proper showing of fatigue. Like if you see that, it's like red flags, like alert systems is like, what I need to do for the next few days. You need to recover.
In the effort itself, you see the power line sort of drop down a little bit and go back up. That's me getting out of the saddle.
Yeah.
These are seated efforts. Well, you can't, I mean, we do out of saddle efforts, but these were supposed to be seated. I was getting out of the saddle, not strategically.
Yeah.
I was getting out of the saddle because it felt like the only way for me to get through the effort.
Yeah.
What's that a sign of?
Yeah, you're struggling.
Yeah. Thanks.
Actually, you bring that funny point. You bring that up. This standing versus seating, because I'm a big believer of you can do whatever you want. I don't care if you're seated or standing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not of the conception that you should do your effort seated versus standing. So that's quite an interesting point. But we can talk about that later if we have.
Yeah, it's another rabbit hole. And variability. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the plan was to be seated for them.
Yeah. And you would usually be able to do them seated.
I would normally be able, but I was trying to leverage my upper body.
Yeah, and so you can look at the cadence there too. So I can see the cadence going up and down. So you go to 60 RPM, 60 to 70 when you stand typically, and you're typically around that 90 to 80 to 90 mark when you're seated, because that's you're comfortable.
Yeah.
But you can see when you get out of the saddle, because your cadence drops immediately, power increases. It's a very common thing.
Yeah.
Because people are trying to generate more power out of the saddle.
Yeah, and the heart rate, which you wouldn't be able to note really as my coach, because you don't look, at this level of detail. But what I kind of felt like it at the time, that my heart rate wasn't going up as far as it should. I was sort of plateauing at about 175 to 177, I think was my max, maybe 178. I did a VO2 max session, say 3 or 4 days before that, similar wattage, where I'm hitting sort of 180, 181 max heart rate. So I felt like my heart rate was kind of stuck
Yeah.
I didn't want to go up, which is what
Sign of fatigue.
my body was really trying to tell me, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So those things combined, the net result, as you said. So what did we do? I told you it was the worst session. What did you do?
Essentially, just said we need to recover. So
Okay.
the next day we had a recovery.
Full rest day?
We had a full rest day, which is what we needed to do as well. But I think on the Wednesday, because we were in that intense block, we're like, usually you would be able to do that intense session and then rest and then do another one on the Wednesday. But I said, no, let's can that. Let's do easy. And we actually did a base training ride. And this relates to what we were talking before, but it's your intensity factor which is how the percentage of threshold was 62%. So it's quite low relative to a base training ride, but that's exactly what you needed.
Yeah.
That's a recovery ride.
Yeah.
So,
and I came good. Interestingly, I started that ride still feeling terrible.
Yeah.
But probably about an hour plus in, all of a sudden it was like, I feel good again.
Yeah. And that's a good point, is that a full rest day can sometimes not be the right thing to do. So sometimes if you're really fatigued and you have a full day off, it does take you an hour, 30 minutes or an hour to get into a session. So I know some people who don't like rest days at all. They like having active recovery ride, because it keeps your legs firing. And the next day, it's a lot easier for you to turn on.
Yes. Okay. And then for me, the negative effect of that was, number one, because I lost form, I got really tight hip flexors and had a wonky knee. So I borderline injured myself. And mentally, because I couldn't get the power up, I felt like my training wasn't working all of a sudden, even though everything had been positive before then. So there was a real mental aspect to it as well. And it wasn't until the Sunday session where I went out and everything was good and I got my power back better than ever. I feel good again. But there was a week of sort of mind games as well. So the domino effect, as you said at the start, is pretty significant from one bad session.
Yeah, and it's very common to have a bad session in a training block. Like this is probably the first bad session that you've had, which has been a good sign that we've managed everything quite well. But everything else happens. Like you may have had a really tough week at work or a tough week at home, or you didn't get much sleep.
That's every week, mate.
But it's very common for people to miss a session or not hit a session to the right power zones, and that's completely fine. And when you look at it in the grand scheme of the block, we have 12 weeks of training. How many sessions are there? 12 by 5, for example. You've got close to 70 sessions, 80 sessions in there. So one session doesn't mean much at all. Yeah. Like if overall we want to build that consistency and build it all together. So and from a coach's perspective, I'm not too concerned that you didn't hit that session. I'm just worried. I need to make sure that you recover, because I know that the form is there and the fitness is there, and I need to reassure you that it's okay to have a session.
It's okay, Cam.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you a cuddle.
Yeah. I think where it can get quite sketchy though is if I just kept going, I didn't speak to you, and I did another high intensity session on the Wednesday, and I think this is what a lot of people do, is they keep digging the hole. So that was, the scenario that could have played out. I guess the ultimate scenario that I could have listened to my body and listened to my heart rate in that Monday session, just said, you know what, I'm just going to do nothing today, and I'm going to tell you I felt crap, and we could have done the HIIT session maybe on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, and not cause that negative mindset, not cause that needing to reshuffle things around as much, etc. But ultimately, you're right, it's all come good.
Yeah, and that's the coach-athlete relationship. Like you need to be open, and if you didn't hit a session, it's okay. If you've got a good relationship with your coach, or your coach is handing you like, oh, you didn't hit that session, well, that's a bad thing. You don't want that. You want reassurance and to feel okay if you miss a session, because it's not the end of the world.